Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep into a topic that feels absolutely critical right now.
Yeah.
Understanding leadership in contemporary China.
Especially Xi Jinping.
Exactly. He's been described as, well, potentially the most powerful person in the world since Mao Zedong, right? And getting a clear picture of that power is famously challenging.
It truly is a complex puzzle.
Mhm.
Our mission here in this deep dive is really to go through the material we have and, pull out the most important insights.
Trying to figure out who she actually is.
Yeah, who he is, trace his rise to such, immense power, understand his impact on China, on the world, and really grapple with why understanding him is so crucial, even though it's so difficult.
And the material we looked at, it really highlights some key threads right away, doesn't it?
Definitely.
There's the dramatic concentration of power under Xi that jumps out.
Mm-hmm. And China's increasingly direct challenge to the United States. That's huge.
Right, and then you get these unavoidable comparisons to historical figures, the heavyweights like Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping.
And beyond just Xi himself, there's the whole nature of Chinese leadership and just how baffling it can be to study from the outside.
It's a vast landscape, sometimes pretty opaque.
For sure. So our goal is really to guide you, the listener, through this material and sort of illuminate what seems most important to grasp about this pivotal figure in the system he commands.
Okay, so let's jump right into Xi's first decade in office. Looking back at that period, two major characteristics really stand out in the analysis.
Yeah, the first one is China's, significantly increased willingness and ability to challenge the United States as a global superpower.
They're not laying low anymore.
Exactly. The material uses this phrase, quite striking, saying Xi has effectively unleashed the tiger.
Unleashed a tiger.
Yeah, okay.
And alongside that outward push.
In parallel, yes, there's been this massive concentration power within China itself.
And that's where the Mao comparisons really start coming in, isn't it?
It is. This internal power shift is where many observers look and see Xi as the strongest leader since Mao, who founded the PRC back in '49.
Some even argue he might be more powerful. That sounds controversial.
Well, perhaps. It's argued because the context is so different.
Right. The China Xi leads today is just vastly more powerful globally than Mao's China ever was. That's a crucial point.
Mm-hmm. And here's a fascinating little detail the material highlights, almost symbolic.
Oh.
Xi, remarkably, shares a birth year with Mao, both born in the year of the snake.
Huh. Is there significance tied to that in the sources?
Well, they draw on traditional Chinese astrology, noting the personality traits often linked to the year of the snake. Things like charming, positive, enterprising.
Okay.
But also potentially dangerous as an enemy. Headstrong, authoritarian, tough, and having, a strong thirst for power. It adds this layer of traditional symbolism to how he's perceived.
Interesting layer. Okay, so we understand he's incredibly powerful, but how do we even, accurately describe that power? Using the Western term president for China's leader, the material says that's actually quite misleading.
Yeah, it really underplays the real scope of his authority. China's system, it's built on three main pillars, right? The Communist Party, the government, and the military.
And the key thing, especially under Xi, is the party's dominance.
Absolutely. The government and the military are fundamentally subordinate to the party. That's critical.
So the top job, the undisputed #1 position, is General Secretary of the Communist Party.
That's the seat of ultimate power. The leader holds multiple titles, General Secretary, President, Head of the Military. But the agenda, the big decisions, they're made within the highest party bodies.
The Politburo, the Standing Committee, the Central Committee.
Exactly. And the government and military. Their main job is to implement what the party decides.
And the scale of control that the General Secretary wields is just immense.
Think about it. A party apparatus of around 96 million members.
Governing 1.4 billion people.
Commanding the world's largest standing army, about 2 million personnel.
And overseeing an economy that's potentially becoming the world's biggest.
And the material also really underscores the party's absolute control, stretching into, everything. Legislative, judicial powers, the media, public opinion, education. It's a level of centralized authority that's hard to find parallels for.
Yeah, you contrast that with, say, the U.S. system. The whole separation of powers thing there really limits the president's power compared to what the Chinese general secretary holds. It's just a fundamental difference in structure.
And look, to really understand Xi, you absolutely need to understand the figures who came before and shaped modern China. Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. Their legacies are just baked into the system Xi now leads.
Mao obviously led the communists to victory, declared the PRC in 49. The analysis shows he got his, well, almost unrivaled position by uniting a fractured country, rebuilding self-respect after that century of humiliation.
Right, starting with the first Opium War. He dramatically transformed the economy, too, using the Soviet model industrialization collectivization.
But that came at a terrible cost.
A tremendous human cost, yes. The material talks about the devastating consequences, like the Great Leap Forward famine, suffering, and the chaos of the Cultural Revolution.
The Red Guards, permanent revolution.
Yeah, the estimated death toll from his policies is just staggering, somewhere between, 40 to 70 million people?
It's hard to comprehend. Then, a stark contrast with Deng Xiaoping taking power in 78. He's described as much more of a pragmatist, right?
Absolutely. Focused on practical results, not Mao's ideology or, frankly, tyranny. Deng shifted the focus squarely onto economic growth.
Those famous slogans capture it perfectly.
They really do. Let some become rich first. Basically saying growth matters more than strict equality for now.
It doesn't matter if the cat is black or white.
If it catches mice, it's a good cat. Exactly. Pragmatism over ideological purity. That was the core message.
And that kicked off the whole reform and opening up era, transforming China from, a closed, planned economy to something much more market-oriented and globally connected.
And importantly, Deng tried to prevent another Mao situation. The material highlights his efforts.
Like setting term limits.
Yes, in 1982, a 5-year term limit for top leaders, and introducing collective leadership in the Politburo Standing Committee, trying to spread the power around a bit.
Though, and this is a crucial caveat the material notes, even Deng had his limits. He was the one who ordered the crackdown on the Tiananmen Square protests in 89.
A critical point, yes. Which brings us closer to the present, to Xi's immediate predecessor, Hu Jintao. He was in charge from 2002 to 2012.
And the analysis paints him as, well, a weaker leader compared to Mao and Deng. More of a technocrat, a party man.
Yeah, the sense is his power was kind of hampered. Maybe his personality, his ambitions weren't as grand, and other leaders were still quite strong then.
It was sometimes called the lost decade internally, suggesting maybe missed chances.
That's the phrase used, yeah. And for Western observers, it was famously the era of who's who. He just seemed less impactful, more inscrutable.
Which makes Xi Jinping's rise and his unexpected strength all the more striking when you look at the material.
Absolutely. Born in 1953, son of Ji Zongsun, one of Mao's vice premiers. So, a privileged start.
But that ended abruptly. His father was purged just before the Cultural Revolution.
Right, the family faced humiliation, and Xi himself got sent to the countryside for re-education, like so many others of his generation. A really formative, probably traumatic time.
He joined the party near the end of that chaos and started his political climb in the early 80s just as Deng's reforms were kicking in, worked his way up in coastal provinces, Fujian, Xizang.
And his path to the very top really solidified in 2007. Brought back to Beijing onto the Politburo Standing Committee, clearly positioned to take over in 2012.
But here's the twist the material emphasizes. Back in 2012, a lot of people thought he'd be a weak leader.
Yeah, that was the common prediction. The thinking involved recent scandals shaking the party, ongoing power struggles, Xi maybe not having his own solid power base yet.
And lots of Politburo members being appointees of his predecessors, right?
Exactly. Some even hoped he might be a reformist. They pointed to his father's history, Xi's own rough experience during the Cultural Revolution, thinking maybe he understood the dangers of despotism and would liberalize things.
The economy, maybe even politics, wishful thinking.
Well, as the analysis states pretty clearly, those predictions were well off the mark. Xi hasn't been weak or reformist at all. He's emerged as an extraordinarily strong leader.
Described using terms like modern Chinese emperor.
That kind of language is used, yes. And he moved fast to consolidate that power.
How so? The material points to specific things.
Key actions, yeah. Speaking Xi's thoughts written into the party and state constitutions, that's huge.
And removing presidential term limits,
Yeah.
basically allowing him to stay for life in
A
prison.
massive change. And then deliberately building up a personality cult around himself, which definitely echoes the Mao era.
Okay, so this brings us to that core challenge, actually understanding Chinese leadership from the outside, this whole field of Beijingology. Why is it so tough?
Well, the fundamental problem, as the material explains, is it's just a very closed system. Getting reliable info about what's really going on inside Shanghai, Beijing's leadership compound is incredibly difficult.
And that lack of access just fuels speculation, right? Rumors everywhere.
Exactly. There's a great quote from Laozi cited in the material that captures it perfectly. Those who talk do not know. Those who know do not talk.
Huh. Yeah, that sums it up. The material also mentions this tendency for Western observers to see Chinese politics through normative spectacles, like seeing what they want to see.
Viewing it through the lens of how they think it should work, which can lead to that wishful thinking we saw with the early Xi predictions.
And studying China under Xi specifically seems even harder.
Arguably, yes. Partly because of his own nature. He's described as inherently cautious, someone who intentionally hides his true intentions. Caution is seen as a dominant trait.
What's really striking, the material points out, is the lack of good biographies on Xi Jinping.
It's surprising, isn't it? You can find decent books on Putin, Duterte, even Kim Jong-un. But finding a really insightful biography of Xi, it's tough.
Why is that, according to the analysis?
Well, the suggestions are pretty straightforward. The people who really know him won't talk, either out of loyalty or, maybe more likely, fear. And Xi himself is just inaccessible.
Rarely gives interviews, never takes questions after speeches, controls the narrative completely.
Yeah, unlike some past leaders, Jiang Zemin, for example, was apparently more open, even did that 60 Minutes interview.
And Hu Jintao had few biographies, but maybe because he was seen as less exciting?
Less exciting or boring, as the material suggests, not because he was inaccessible. Xi isn't boring, the analysis makes clear, just uniquely inaccessible.
But despite all this difficulty, the point is made really strongly. We have to try and piece together what we can. Understanding Xi is just too important now.
Absolutely. Given his influence on China and the world, and this is where that idea of Beijingology, studying Chinese elite politics, comes back in.
And there's this tension discussed between the art and the science of it all.
Right. The art side is the traditional China watching. Listening to the rumor mill, reading the Hong Kong press gossip, trying to interpret subtle signals, reading tea leaves, essentially.
But the risk there is reading too much into small things, right? Missing the bigger picture.
Exactly. Over-interpreting rumors, missing underlying stability. Then you have the science and this more systematic stuff like quantitative elite studies.
Rigorous, data-driven.
But sometimes maybe too theoretical or disconnected from the immediate reality of decision-making. Not always timely.
So the suggestion is a kind of new Beijingology, bridging that gap.
Yeah, combining the traditional skills, the context, the intuition with newer social science methods, elite studies, textual analysis, trying to get more complete, rigorous picture.
Okay, so the material then structures its deeper look around some key questions about Xi's China. That seems like a good way to synthesize this.
It provides great framework, yeah. First, Xi's rise. How and why did he make it to the very top?
And the analysis suggests personal traits were key. Survival skills, maybe from the Cultural Revolution.
Survival skills, flexibility, ambition, and a really sharp sense of political timing, knowing when to take sides.
Then concentrating power. How did he pull that off? Secure so much personal authority?
And the big question posed is, was this a collective decision by the elite to deal with governance problems? Or was it mainly Xi's own drive for power?
Because the answer tells you a lot about how things work at the top now, doesn't it? Is it despotism and fear, or is there still room for debate and consensus behind the scenes?
Precisely. Then there's the whole personality cult aspect, extolling the leader.
Why did that happen? Did the elite allow it, maybe even encourage it, seeing a strong leader as necessary?
Perhaps seeing it as a way to handle problems and keep the party legitimate. But that raises the next question.
Are there limits to it? Could it backfire?
Exactly. Are there signs it's creating new problems?
And connected to that is the ideological shift. The early reformist predictions were way off.
Completely wrong. Xi has overseen a major reversal of that post-Deng pragmatism. It's described as an ideological renaissance.
More Marxism, even bringing Mao back into favor more.
A clear resurgence, yes. Actively influencing politics and society again.
And then there's the world stage. Xi's impact on foreign policy.
A huge shift. It's described as basically saying goodbye to Deng's strategy of laying low. China has emerged forcefully, demanding to be treated as a great power.
Which leads to this wolf warrior diplomacy idea.
That term is used to describe the style. Unconventional, uncompromising, often offensive, very assertive, definitely undiplomatic at times.
And the consequence a backlash.
A significant backlash, according to the analysis.
Yeah.
Other countries are getting worried, finding common ground in their anxieties about China, and starting to push back or coordinate.
Which brings us back full circle almost to that central comparison. Is Xi a new Mao?
The material revisits this directly, highlighting the similarities people point to. Charisma, the dominant party role, the hard line against opponents, the personality cult. It's all there.
It's interesting, too, just as a side note, how the material handles the language using pinyin consistently, like Mao Zedong, Beijing, but making exceptions for well-known English spellings like sensu shows careful handling of the details.
Yeah, it reflects a commitment to clarity in presenting this complex info.
So if we try to boil it all down, the core takeaways from this deep dive, Xi's power is undeniable, right? He's
Correct.
fundamentally reshaped China.
No question. And his leadership is a clear break from that post-Mao, post-Deng era, especially on power sharing and ideology.
And he's pushed China onto the world stage much more assertively.
Even confrontationally, you could say.
But, and this is the big but truly understanding how it all works, the inner mechanics of his leadership and the Chinese system, that remains incredibly difficult.
Because of that opacity we discussed. It's just baked into the system.
Yet the material stresses, even with those challenges, trying to understand Xi and China is more vital now than maybe ever before.
Absolutely critical.
So here's maybe the final thought to leave you, the listener, with. Given this inherent opacity, this difficulty in getting clear information that the material describes so well,
Right.
how reliable can any outside analysis really be when it comes to predicting what's next?
What does that fundamental uncertainty mean for trying to figure out China's future path under Xi?
It's a huge question, something to definitely keep mulling over.